girlfriend of a Boston police officer whose body was found
in the murder trial of Karen Reed after the jury said it was unable to
they
reach
will
a
retry
verdict.
Karen Reed
is
after a judge declared
Hello and welcome back to The Alternate. I'm your host, Tab, for today, and we dove into everything that happened on day 14 of the Karen Reed retrial. It's Monday, May 12th, 2025, and day 14 was all about finishing testimony of Massachusetts State Police Sergeant Yuri Buchenik. Now, 3 days with this guy, you guys. I think he has taken one for the team. Or maybe prosecution will change their mind and bring up Proctor? I don't know. Maybe Higgins? I think not, but it's possible. Okay, so before we get started with this cross, prosecution wanted to talk to the judge about how the defense was interrogating the witness. Now, we're not supposed to know this as jurors, but it's kind of interesting. So basically, the Commonwealth thinks that questioning the integrity of the police is getting a little extreme and causing bias on the jury. While Bev, or Judge Cannoni, as the formal people like to call her, well, she didn't really put a firm hold down on this. Maybe she gave a little warning, but we'll never know. So let's get into the second full day of cross with Yuri. Defense attorney Alan Jackson continued his methodical teardown of this investigation. One of the first areas that was pressed on was the potential conflict of interest involving Buchenik's former subordinate, Trooper Proctor. Well, he was the lead investigator on the case, which you probably know by now, and Jackson asked Buchenik whether Proctor ever mentioned having a personal relationship with the Albert family. Now, you all know that the Albert family was the home where John's body was found. Well, he says that Proctor did say something when he was walking up to the house that morning. He just said he knew them from around town and through friends. This is significant because Brian Albert is a Boston police officer and the homeowner, and if the lead investigator is friends, like family friends with this person, then there can be bias. Well, the defense clearly wants the jury to think that, right? And what the jury didn't hear, again, is in a private hearing, Jackson brought up a text message that suggests that Albert's family actually wanted to give a gift to Proctor to thank him for his help on the case. Like, what in the Sam hell is going on here? Well, Cannoni, she says, no, you cannot get into that because Buchenik claimed to not have any direct knowledge of really Proctor having a relationship. So this, I think we should see somewhere along the way, but we are not going to hear about that now. So while the jury heard that Proctor knew the Alberts, they did not hear the full extent of this cozy ties text message. You know what I'm saying? As a side note, we did learn that Proctor was later fired, from the state police for his conduct in this actual case, and that Buchenik actually was disciplined as well, losing 5 vacation days for failing to properly supervise Proctor. So that gives an idea of how problematic this angle is for the prosecution. Now, next, the defense zeroed in on some real disturbing text messages that cast doubt on the professionalism of this investigation. These messages were in a group chat. They were from August 2022, months after this incident. And it was Trooper Proctor, Buchenik, and I think one other officer. In court, Jackson had Buchenik read out loud what Proctor wrote in the chat, and it was jaw-dropping. Proctor referred to Karen Reed as his retarded client in a message to a group referencing Karen's attorney, David Yannetti. Yeah, you heard that right. The lead investigator used these derogatory slurs to describe Karen. Real class act, dude. And then he also writes, "No nudes so far," indicating obviously that he's looking through Karen's phone to find nude pictures of her. I mean, what in the Sam hell is going on at that police department? He also writes about Yannetti, "I hate that man. I truly hate him," referring to Karen's attorney. And you want to know what Sergeant Buchenik's response was in that group chat? Thumbs up. No joke. Although he says he doesn't remember reading any of those text messages, also says that they came through on his Apple Watch, but I think I'm calling BS on that, buddy. Jackson hammered Buchenik pretty hard on these text messages, essentially asking, what kind of investigation is this? What kind of integrity is this? And Buchenik was visibly uncomfortable. He conceded that Proctor's comments were not appropriate and not professional, and that the text does not show integrity or honor. He also admitted that giving a thumbs up was not an ideal response. And at one point, Buchenik tried to defend and say Proctor was entitled to his opinion under the First Amendment, which is free speech, but that fell pretty flat. It sounded like, to me, he was grasping at straws because that damage was done, and the jury for sure heard all of that. The defense then introduced surveillance focusing on Brian Higgins. Now, they played some surveillance footage from the Canton Police Department that captured Brian early morning of January 29th, 2022. This is the day that John O'Keefe's body was found, okay? So at 1:29 a.m., Brian Higgins' Jeep Wrangler pulls into the station's parking lot. What is he doing there at 1:29 in the morning? Surveillance shows Higgins was inside the police station for about 6 minutes and then walks back out to the parking lot at 1:34, talking on his phone. And then he moves to another car in the parking lot, believed to be registered to another law enforcement officer, opens the door, grabs something, and then places it in his Jeep before driving away around 1:45. All of it is real sus to me. This doesn't make me feel good at all. I mean, if prosecution has this right, John O'Keefe has already been now lying for 45 minutes in the yard of Brian Albert's house, and Brian Higgins somehow walks out, doesn't discover John's body, drives to the police department? To do what? At what time in the morning? I think this is definitely a red flag. Then surveillance footage was put up from inside the Canton Police Department's garage on January 29th, 2022. Now, this is the day that John O'Keefe's body was found and Karen's SUV was seized. This video shows that the Lexus is being brought into the police garage around 5:37 in the afternoon. Now, here's the kicker. During the first trial, the same video was shown to the jury, but it was inadvertently inverted or mirrored in the display because it was reversed. So what the jury saw was a bit misleading in that first trial. For example, Trooper Proctor appeared to be on the left side of the vehicle near the taillight, when in reality, he was on the right side of the vehicle where the taillight was actually broken. So today, the defense made sure to clarify that. Jackson played the corrected video orientation showing the true layout. He then walked Buchenik through it, and the implications are pretty clear. Proctor had the opportunity to mess with that taillight while the car was in the police custody. Jackson also wanted to go over the timeline. He established that the SUV was in the garage by 5:35 on January 29th, and Trooper Proctor was still at the station with the vehicle, not at the crime scene. And remember, they didn't return from the crime scene till later, 5:51, which is pretty critical because according to prior testimony, no taillight pieces were found at the scene before 5:35. The first mention of finding this broken taillight evidence in the snow at 34 Fairview Road came well after that time, and the police garage, Sallyport as they call it, is only 1.5 miles away, a 4-minute drive from the Alberts house. So You tell me. Could we get those 4 or 6 pieces from Karen's car back to Brian Albert's and no one would know? To add a little intrigue to this whole theory, Jackson highlighted a lapse in the surveillance footage. That's right. There is a chunk of about 43 minutes missing, or not recorded properly, or just not freaking there. The video basically jumps in time. One moment, it's an empty garage, and the next moment, the timestamp is 5:50. The Lexus is already parked inside without showing the actual movement of it getting inside. Buchenik does acknowledge that this jump cut is an anomaly and it doesn't happen that often. The defense seized on that and they suggested that something might have happened, something nefarious, I guess. Perhaps evidence was planted or removed while the cameras weren't working. After the defense finally wrapped up its real exhaustive cross-examination, but you guys know I love a cross, it was prosecution's turn to come and try to rehabilitate their case. And I'm telling you, I think they needed to try really hard with this one. So Hank Brennan comes up. He conducts a redirect examination with Sergeant Buchenik, aiming to shore up some Commonwealth narrative and address the defense's insinuations. Well, it wasn't a very fast redirect. It was pretty long. One of Brennan's first targets was the taillight planting theory. He asked Buchenik point blank, did he ever see anybody with a broken taillight? You know, he asked if Proctor had it, if he had it, and the answer was no. You know, I did not take the taillight. Brennan wanted the jury to hear that straight from the horse's mouth, that nothing sneaky was happening with this taillight. Brennan also highlighted that it would have been practically impossible for the officers to plant the Lexus's taillight pieces at the scene because the first officers who actually found those pieces weren't even the ones with the car. In fact, Buchenik and Proctor were busy at the station with the SUV when the officers discovered the evidence back at 34 Fairview. This suggests that no single officer or small group had an exclusive control over both the car and the crime scene at a real critical time. So Brennan's implications, the timeline doesn't support the conspiracy to plant evidence, and multiple police would have had to be in on it, which is pretty far-fetched. That's what he's saying. Prosecutor Brennan also addressed the video anomalies. He brought out the fact that the audit of the Canton Police surveillance system, it was conducted in April of 2025, found that the mirrored image issue was a known malfunction affecting at least 3 other cameras in Canton and not just the police garage. So basically he's trying to say, like, we didn't purposely mirror that footage, that it was just a technical glitch and it occurred elsewhere and it wasn't something cooked up specifically to confuse, this case. As for this missing footage in the garage video, Buchenik testified that such lapse had occurred even before January 29th, and it wasn't really unique to O'Keefe's case, and it happens from time to time. Brennan was clearly trying to neutralize any kind of sinister aura that the defense casts on those videos. He was telling the jury, sometimes cameras malfunction. Don't leap to any conclusions like it is a cover-up. So finally, Brennan touched on a minor point that might actually resonate with the jurors. Why Buchenik and other officers interviewed certain witnesses in their private home instead of at the police station. Well, the defense had hinted that the investigators gave friendly treatment to O'Keefe's friends like McCabe and family that were witnesses by meeting them at McCabe's house shortly after, not actually pulling them into the police station. Brennan asked Buchenik to explain that decision, and basically what he said is the conditions were bad and these witnesses just found their friend dead, and so it was pretty traumatizing and he didn't want to traumatize them more by interviewing them, at the police station. He felt that it might help them recall information if they were in the comforts of their own home. This line of questioning was likely meant to show the jurors the investigators weren't colluding with those witnesses, rather just trying to be considerate under the circumstances. It's a small pushback on the defense's narrative that something's fishy is going on. It might have worked a little bit. After the redirect, the defense came back on there to take another bite at this apple and did a recross examination. Alan Jackson stood up one more time to confront Buchenik, mainly to ensure that the last thing the jurors heard from this witness favored the defense. Jackson honed in on Higgins' angle again, essentially walked Buchenik back through the scenario of Brian Higgins possibly having a moment of jealousy. Jackson reminded everyone that Brennan had just asked about a motive to murder, and Buchenik said no, that he did not feel like Higgins had a motive to murder. But Jackson reframed that question. What about a motive to confront John O'Keefe stemming from a personal grudge? He brought up it in that context, like weeks of flirty communication between Karen and Higgins. Then Karen walks into the bar with John on the 28th, and Higgins, who reportedly is intoxicated, reacts by texting Karen something sarcastic. Remember, he texted Karen, well, and wouldn't that potentially make Higgins jealous or angry at John? Jackson asked Buchenik if he, as an investigator, saw a possible scenario where Higgins could be motivated by jealousy. And after some pressing, Buchenik finally conceded and said, there is a possibility there. He quickly added, but I didn't see it. That admission that it's at least possible is really what Jackson wanted on the record. You guys, the defense does not need to prove that someone else did this. All they need to do is have the jury have a little doubt that Karen actually did. Jackson even alluded to an incident at the Waterfall Bar and Grill where many of those friends were gathered earlier that night. Okay, so he suggests that at the bar, another friend, Chris Albert, brother of Brian Albert, had to physically put a hand on Brian Higgins' arm as if to hold him back or calm him down. This was an attempt to illustrate that Higgins was like in an agitated state that night. Buchenik said he didn't specifically recall that detail on any of those tapes that he watched, but the point was made to the jury through Jackson's question alone. And so with that, the defense finished their recross. So after 3 days of countless questioning, I mean, this guy really got the book thrown at him. Sergeant Yuri Buchenik was finally excused as a witness. And guess what? That's all we had today is one guy. Oh my gosh. Judge Canoni thanked the jurors for their patience and sent them home for day 14. And we will be back on day 15 with much more. I can't imagine what the Commonwealth has for us tomorrow. And, I cannot wait. Margot will be with us tomorrow, back with day 15. And until then, alternates, I will see you in a couple of days. If you want more, we just dropped a second Patreon episode. You can get us at patreon.com/thealternate. Please leave us a rating and review if you can, and please be nice because we are new and that is how we get seen. And so we will really appreciate it if you do so. And leave us a comment where you can. Tell us what other cases you want us to cover, and we will. All right. We'll see you tomorrow.